Good morning and welcome everybody. See, some of us are still streaming in, but we do want to start on time, so I'll open our final day. I'll just give everybody a moment to find their seats and assemble. Thank you again all so much for keeping to our scheduled time. Time really flies when you're having a good time. Can you believe we're on the final day already of our I4C 2024 conference? I'm competing with the chit-chatter. I'm not going to win, so I'll wait for everybody to settle down. Thank you again, and a very good morning. I'm sure more seats will be filled as we get underway, but now in this final plenary session, we're going to be looking at, of course, the road to Baku, crossing the hurdles on Article 6, which many of you will agree is both very timely and critical. COP29 is just 2 months away. And we know from the recently concluded SB 60 negotiations that a number of issues remain unresolved around Article 6, matters around, well, I guess I won't delve into that now because that will be for the panel to do, but ahead of COP29, it is essential that we resolve some of these issues, position ourselves in the best way possible to be able to get successful outcomes at the upcoming COP summit. And this includes balancing all the different expectations of the different stakeholders. So to take us through this conversation now, I'm going to introduce our moderator for the morning. That's Andre Marcu. He is the founder and executive director of the European Roundtable on Climate Change and Sustainable Transition. He's making his way up and he will introduce his panelists for the morning. So a round of applause for Andre, please.
Well, they never told me I would be alone. Well, look, good morning to all of you. And today, this morning, listen, let's be informal here, because one thing that I should know, because I used to run AIDA, is that you never be on the panel at 9 o'clock in the morning after the AIDA party. Now, the lady here, whose name I don't know, gets the first prize because she was here first. We'll figure out what the prize is later. In any case, I think before we get into a lighter discussion, I think I'd like to invite the panelists on. First, I'll invite Martin Heschen. Come on down. Martin is the policy advisor at the European Commission, one of the active and lead negotiators for the EU and its member states. He's on the vice chair of a supervisory body and former chair of the CDM executive board and many other titles. So a very knowledgeable and experienced negotiator that you don't cross easily in the negotiating room. Second is Natalie Flores-Gonzalez. She is the vice chair of SABSTA, an international policy specialist of almost 15 years of experience providing senior services on climate change policy, international development, and environmental issues. Third, invited here is Mbaye. Mbaye Diagne is the lead coordinator for the African Group of Negotiators, a member of the supervisory board of the Article 6.4. He's also a director general of Afrique Énergie Environnement, a consultancy firm in Senegal, but again, one of the key negotiators, if you want, a strong voice that we always hear in our debates when we get into negotiating room. And last but not least is Sonam Tashi. Sonam Tashi, who has gratefully accepted to join us last night because Ursula Fuentes had to, unfortunately, excuse herself. So Sonam is an old colleague. He was the coordinator for LDCs for a long time. We worked together in the Bhutanese delegation, but also now is the Director General in charge of climate change in Bhutan, a country known for the Gross Happiness Index, and a wonderful country for those of you that have the opportunity, a really wonderful country to visit, but also a very knowledgeable and economist that looks at Article 6 and carbon markets in a way, in a very fresh way. So thank you very much, all of you, for being here. Now, we are in September 2024. We've had 2 years of trying to figure out a few things in Article 6, and unfortunately, we did not quite manage to reach a conclusion. Now, we are taking a third kick at the can in Baku at COP29, but going to Baku, the COP in Baku, we're also going to the COP in Baku via a week or 10 days of sessions in Baku starting in September 29, then 29, 30 September, October 1st. There's an informal dialogue. Then there's the workshop that has been mandated from SABSTA, and then the supervisory board is meeting, and then there's the pre-COP. So there's a whole bunch of people around this room that are going to be in Baku probably for 2 weeks in October. They'll go home for 2 weeks and then come back for another 2 weeks, 3 weeks in November. But Article 6 has emerged as one of the important topics. We all assume that NCQG and others will be actually the total highlight and will attract the total attention in Baku. But the incoming presidency of Azerbaijan has made it quite clear that this is a priority for them. I think they made it quite clear. They made it repeatedly. They've said it in many, many fora. So that makes it, there's a lot of pressure right now on parties to reach an agreement after the 3-year negotiation that we've been going through. The issues are varied, and it's not like before Glasgow. I think we had some clarity on certain topics before going to the Glasgow COP when we figure out the rule book. Now we are going to Baku, and there are another set of issues. Not least among them is the issue of infrastructure, the issue of authorization, the issue of review, and there's a number of issues like that that need to be figured out. And they are both on the side of Article 6.2 as well as on the side of Article 6.4. The people around this room, they're not the ones that are going to make the decision alone, but they're quite key in that discussion. They represent very different constituencies. As I said, Natalie is the vice chair. I was with Harry in Accra the beginning of this week. And does speak for Africa. Martin speaks for the EU. And Sonam is not the coordinator anymore because Bhutan has graduated from being an LDC, but no doubt about it, a very senior and a very influential negotiator. So we looked at what kind of format we will do on this, and we agreed to sit down and have a conversation as opposed to have another set of presentations, which probably you guys will not wake up in the morning early enough for. So I'll go first to Martin, I think, and try and ask Martin a number of questions. The first one is, Martin, the issue of infrastructure, which sounds like a humdrum type of stuff, and you've done registries in your life and so on, but it's become a contentious issue. And I suspect that for many in this room, they know it's an issue and they know they need it. But they need to understand why it's such an issue. And it can be summarized by saying that it's an issue about the vision of a more centralized versus decentralized, whether this is the characteristic that you want to use or not, but this is what is being used in many ways. There's also discussion that the international registry, which in many people's vision has been the place where countries will have a registry because they don't want or they can't have one in their home, they will simply have one there. It seems that some people would say, well, that vision of an international registry is being changed. So talk to us a little bit about what is the tension regarding infrastructure. Why is there a tension over something that should be a bunch of techies with a computer running stuff? Martin?
Okay, thanks for the question, but if I can maybe just go back to a few fundamentals and I'll get to the question. For us, registries is obviously part of the picture, but I don't think it's the biggest priority. To use sound bites, we want a system of markets that's both effective, i.e. delivers on the goals of the Paris Agreement, and is fair, enables the participation of as many as possible. And that's where our negotiation priorities lie. And people often ask, why are we still banging on about Article 6? Shouldn't it be over by now? But I think there are two big problems or big adjustments that the world has had to make because of Paris that it's taken some time for Article 6 to do. The first one was that vexed issue of double counting, which we solved in Glasgow. But you have to observe it took 5 years for us to finally agree that when one trades under Article 6, that one can't keep what one has sold, and there have to be effective double counting rules. But it did take 5 years, and it was politically difficult. And then in the 3 years since Glasgow, I think we've had some difficulty adjusting to the implications of that. And certainly for us, the priorities are figuring out how a crediting system can work in Paris-aligned circumstances. How can you reconcile crediting with both the buyer and seller targets? And that's something that's a priority for us to figure out both under 6.2 and 6.4. The registry situation is in a way a mystery to us as a party, because we had proposed a Kyoto-style system of national registries designated by countries, but also recognized that not every country would be able to do that. And so it was an EU proposal to have an international registry that countries that didn't have their own registry could have access to. And that's, we understood, would deliver the infrastructure needed to facilitate accounting, but also participation in markets by countries that might be less able, the fair bit of the equation. It seems that in the intervening years that there's a great wish for existing program registries, and there's a practical reason behind it, but for voluntary and other programs registries to be used. And that has become known as the decentralized approach. And we were initially skeptical of nominating program registries to do UN accounting, and want to figure out the relationship between what voluntary programs and other programs might be and the UN international accounting system might be. But we agreed, and I need to remember, I think we agreed in Sharm that we would have both systems. We could accommodate both as long as we were clear that there could be a centralized approach where countries had their own registries or nominated the international registry, or it could be that countries would nominate underlying registries and report on what's going on in the underlying registries. And we've maintained that position throughout. It's only a few parties, perhaps even one, that has a difficulty with the centralized registry approach. It's seen as somehow lacking in integrity or giving access to the UN system in a way that may undermine integrity. I think we understand that point, but our way of maintaining and pursuing integrity is in other bits of the agreement, particularly to do with upfront reporting and having further specification of the cooperative approaches. So to answer your question, I think there are different visions of how the market will be built. One of them is perhaps more country-focused and state-focused, and another one is more voluntary or independent sector-focused. I think both have a role to play, and in fact both have to play a role, but it's a question of how they interact and according to what standards they interact. That's really the important question.
So if I were to describe this, Martin, as the two visions, one of them is where you have the Vera and the gold standard and whatever it is, where parties will have assets and they kind of move inside that registry, and the national registry would essentially be a place where you pull out the information and summarize all that. That's one vision. The other one is a much more Kyoto-ish, like a thing where you actually do run your assets through your national registries, and they play the role of accounting but also holding assets. Is that a correct description?
I think that's the case, but underlying this is, of course, whether the standards that are being applied in the voluntary sector or the independent sector suit the host countries. And so what we're more interested in is what the standards that are being applied to crediting, because countries that have targets no longer can afford to necessarily sell at the rates that some standards would imply. And of course, we know that every host country has an interest in making sure that the market works for them. And so there needs to be a relationship, not only between the registries, but also between the standards and host country approval. And that's where we are most concerned.
And that is a different kettle of fish, a different neuralgic point as to what the reviewers do. What do they review? Do they review the standards or do they review completeness? But let me turn to Natalie, and you together with your chair, Harry, have taken quite an active role and a good role in trying to push this agenda forward. What's your vision in terms of what's going to happen from here? I mean, we're going to go into a whole bunch of meetings that are more technical. Then you're going to have a pre-COP, which is ministerial level. There's probably going to be a head of delegation meeting, maybe after that. What do you see the role of if you had more senior, more political part? Because nice people as they are, at some point they start running into roadblocks. And there may be a need for intervention for, if you're on cooler heads or political level.
Well, the first thing is to understand the process. And sometimes when we are talking about the UN climate change, we get a little lost on our own translation because, of course, it's our daily life, right? So the science and technology body, it's the body that oversees the technical negotiations, in this case, Article 6. And this is important to understand because when we put together the convention and the 3 Rio Convention, we have science and technology from one side, in which we go through the process of first having workshops to make a sense of a science-based approach being negotiated at the political level. So I think that's the first step to understand of the process, because we talk about Article 6, we have to deliver, we need to be more ambitious, we need to build the market, but at the same time, there is a process to do that. So when people talk about progress in the negotiations, I think it's important to understand that each meeting and each conference of the parties translate as progress itself. Like when you have 194 parties, 195 parties trying to make a global decision that will serve as a framework to then downscale under the national circumstances, it's really important to understand that even a little step, it's progress. Being a public servant myself and doing that for many years now, about 9 years, for the government of the Dominican Republic, of course, the political willingness it's key. Because, and okay, now I'm not talking from the Dominican Republic way of thinking, but mine. The willingness of a country to move forward on something comes upon, that decision maker. And we can never forget that the United Nations, as I like to recall, is a club of governments. And the governments have created an enabling environment to have more people on the table. But the most important thing is that who is on the table sitting is the government, and that comes from a presidential scheme that sets priority to an administration, and then that goes down to any of us at the technical negotiations, at the high-level negotiations, and everything. In countries like mine, for example, it's been really challenging to make authorities to understand the market trends, the voluntary carbon markets, the compliance markets, and how to implement that, because my country is only doing social corporate responsibility at this point, just to give you an example. So then making a new authority understand that they need to go beyond that and actually capitalize like what they can get from the market, it's really important. Actually, our only ERPA, we have it with the World Bank, with the FCPF, and it's something good as a starting point, but at the same time, it's challenging. So the political willingness is key to advance the work of SAPSTA. And what we've been doing, I think we have a lot of, not we, but the parties have a lot of progress in Bonn. There are negotiators over here that were on the table and that work very hard to actually have draft conclusions, which we get in Bonn. And right now, I think the political willingness it's going to come from what all the stakeholders demand. We've been doing this for 10 years, and we are literally wasting time. Like, how do we measure the ultimate goal of the convention, which is reducing carbon emissions? And as a representative from a developing country and from small island developing states, and representing the vice chairmanship is representing the islands on their seat, is like, what are we going to do to actually leverage all the money that we need to adapt if in 10 years we've been negotiating the Paris rule book in terms of markets as economic asset, as a risk management tool, and everything that you can get from the market, but we haven't reduced emissions in this part of the world. So I think a very good example, I'm trying to see Juan Pedro is here, but a very good example is Chile. Chile, for me, and this is very personal, of course, it's one of the countries from Latin America, and as a host country, more advanced in terms of this switch in between voluntary to their national priorities and actually compliance market and the framework. Because we cannot get lost on something really important. The convention is a framework. And then each national circumstances define what we are going to do. And Chile is just the example of that. They put together a very ambitious climate law. They are very big in mining. They need to abate their emission. They need to do transition. And they just recognize BERA, gold standard, and CDM in their transition to Article 6. So when you look into that and you see the public views for people to, engage the process of establishing these rules in a developing country, though Chile is very developed for the average of Latin America, but my point is that willingness is over there, and that's a great example to downscale the international framework to the national framework to actually implement. So just giving an example that willingness is possible, but we have to work together as a whole. And yeah, the technicalities of what we do to actually agree on something, like workshops, preparatory meetings, we need that because it's a way to advance things before going to the negotiations. But unless you are on the table in the session, there's nothing taken into account. It's just when negotiators are over there. And sometimes people forward to me text, and I'm like, thank you for that text, but if you're not a party and you're in the room, we cannot take this into account because it's what the party says over there. So I think it's understanding the process, it's demanding the political willingness, and that comes from all stakeholders, even private sector, that it's going to be regulated by this. And of course, demanding your representatives to actually make a decision. I want to be very hopeful about Baku, but my hopes are a little further away, but let's see.
Well, my hopes rest with Mbaye. Mbaye, you've come, we've known each other for many years, that we negotiate together, we've coordinated G77 together for a while, so you come across as a very strong voice, a knowledgeable voice and a strong voice in this discussion. Africa has complained that was somewhat left out or largely left out of the CDM, and obviously a desire that shouldn't happen under the Paris Agreement. But I know you can make a long list, but if you were to point to one or two things in the current text that come out of the SABSTA meeting in Bonn in June for Africa, what is the neuralgic point right now? I mean, if you were to pick a couple.
Thank you, and good morning, colleagues. Africa also wanted in Baku to finalize the rules on Article 6, both on 6.2, to finalize some rules on 6.4 to make it operational, but also, don't forget it, on 6.8 to have real action on the ground. because we have the web-based, but nothing is happening. We want real cooperation on non-market-based approaches also. It's what we want as an outcome in Baku. But now, taking 6.2, I have heard the EU highlighting 3 issues: authorization, this agreed electronic format, which is the annual report, and also the registry issue. But in addition, also we will work on that to try to sort out those issues. We have our views on that. But in addition to that, for Africa, there is another very important issue that was not highlighted by EU. It's about the environmental integrity and the credibility of the 6.2. And for us, it's based on how inconsistencies identified in the reporting of participating party are addressed. What will we do if there is inconsistency in the cooperation? And the review highlight that. It's still under negotiation. And if we want a very credible and ensure the environmental integrity of the whole system, we need to address that. And for Africa, it's very important. When it comes to 6.4, many things are going on. We have, from next year, we will have CDM transitioning project. CDM transitioning project that will be registered because all is already done. And they will issue. But we are not here just to push for CDM projects. We want new projects based on the Paris Agreement to be registered and to deliver. And for that, we need to adopt the standard for the development of methodologies and for removals. That is very important and crucial in Baku to achieve a positive outcome and allow project from next year to deliver. It's adopting the standard as well as adopting the recommendation to be made by the supervisory body. And we as Africa will be pushing for that. And lastly, as I said, in the 6.8, we have the web base, we have many submissions, but we want from next year to see real cooperation between parties under the non-market-based approaches that delivers concrete actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mbaye. I'm going to turn, your turn is coming, Son. I have to say that these meetings have discovered 2 new species of animals. One of them is called the Carbonosaurus, which is the carbon people, the dinosaurs of the carbon market, and I see a couple of them at the back there. I'm one of them. But there's another species, and that species, Sonam belongs to the other species. The other species is a bunch of Article 6 negotiators that have been elevated, because now Sonam has been elevated to be Director General of Climate Change. So now you don't talk to us anymore, you're going to talk at a higher level and tell us what to do. So the question that I have is how do you see this? I mean, you understand probably better than most heads of delegation what this Article 6 and the technicalities and so on. How do we translate what the problems are into a political discussion? Because in many cases, you know very well that we sit down and say, so how do we tell these guys, what problems do we want these guys to solve? What is the issue that we would want to solve? Can you give us a little bit of an idea that politically, how could this be seen?
Thank you, Andre, and it's an honor to be among the dinosaurs over here. But jokes aside, I think translating this into political will or into a language that the political bosses understand, I think that is a key challenge. For instance, I mean, if I may just recall what happened in Glasgow, and I think Mbaye and Martin were witness to it also. We were there till 2, 3 in the morning, and I don't remember exactly, painfully, all of us gathered and we started writing things about how the baselines and methodology, basically on Article 6.2, 4 and all. We thought we had an agreement, and next day colleagues tell us, look, I'm sorry, instructions, we can't support this. So this is a challenge, and for instance, when you say that we didn't have a deal in Dubai, but when you look, and I think especially Mbai and Martin have mentioned, and just want to add to it also, that if you look at 6.2, whether there was a deal or no in Dubai, 6.2 is moving ahead, right? I mean, there are about 80 some bilateral agreements either in place or being negotiated, including what my country is also negotiating. Then you have work going on, national registries. If you look at 6.4, I mean, I'm not going to repeat what the two honorable SBM members here, I mean, I don't appropriate their work, but a lot of work is being done, right? Methodologies on reports, removals, all these meetings, then the sustainable development tools and all. So the road to Baku is interesting in terms of how the technical negotiators at a technical level can translate or explain to the high-level segment, right, to the political bosses, in this case ministers and all, to take a call. Yeah. And the issue is always this, because ministers, I mean the highest levels of our governments, they're always busy, they have a lot of work. And then they tend to rely a lot on us, again, on our briefings and all. And I think this is the biggest challenge, on how to unlock this, is that how can, say, ministers, I mean, just to simplify the whole process, is that how can they understand through what their technical teams are briefing them, and where can they compromise? And that is the key, that at the political leadership, they need to be able to say that, look, we've heard both sides on the registries, the centralized, we've heard about the flexibilities, national prerogatives of authorization, we've heard about revocations, we've heard about the removals, we've heard about the methodologies. But look, this is what we feel in the greater interests of the market, in greater interests of all parties, in the greater environmental integrity, I mean, of this whole system that we're negotiating. Look, this is what we need to do. And I think that's important. For instance, if you take in Glasgow again, just drawing some experiences, like when the OMGE, I mean, what you call the haircut for doing business. For instance, you take my former group, the LDCs, and also the SIDS, we wanted even up to 30% OMG. But at the end, what the then presidency did was they heard all of us, and then they took that final call of bringing it down to 2% or something. So this is where the leadership will have to make these difficult choices for all of us to work, and it requires a compromise. It requires a very thorough understanding of the technicalities, because when I look at what happened in the head of delegations meeting in Baku recently, I think a month ago, and I don't remember the date, and when you look at the reports that have come out, it's very interesting. When it comes to Article 6, the head of delegations have acknowledged that this is technically challenging and complex for them to understand, And so some of the discussions we're having right now, they've touched upon it, but they've not gone deep into it, They've spoken about, for instance, I just made a note, like they've spoken about, environmental integrity, which is understood. They've spoken about transparency, accountability. They've spoken about human rights, social safeguards, flexibilities of reporting and all, revocation and all. But when you look into these records, they've really not been able to go deep and still find, and I was looking for that, did the head of delegations in Baku give us a solution, right? We've heard the presidency also speak, and in his speech also, in the press release, they've cited everyone, one party said this, someone said this, but, and we all need to work towards that golden handshake in Baku, but how do you reach that golden handshake after that bond reset we have? And that still remains to be solved. Yes. So this is just trying to bring my own technical knowledge and into now a new role that I have of how to explain it in the very simple terms for everyone.
Well, I tell you what, Sonam, golden handshake in my where I come from means something else. So
yes, sorry.
I hope it's not that kind of golden handshake. Martin, before I go, then let's very quick answer. Are we dealing here with technical issues and a bunch of negotiators that have been together for too long and they become stubborn in their old ways because they've said this 2 years ago and they want, or which it's my impression to some degree that when you get political people in the room there is a different interpretation of certain things. And the way they interpret what was agreed, even in Paris, is different. And that then cascades down to where we are now. Or is it just, again, a bunch of technical things that people are just being a little bit stubborn?
Yeah, well, obviously, I think you put your finger on it. It's a question of communication and prioritization, right? There's a lot of technical issues being discussed, and I think only some of them have real political meaning or intent, not all of them. You asked me about registries at the beginning, and I would say that registries is actually really just a technical issue. It shouldn't be politicized. But the issues, and it was a stab through the heart when you said the EU didn't mention environmental integrity. Definitely completely on board environmental integrity, but I would put that as part of the effectiveness part of the equation. And we have concerns and are driven, and that's a policy priority to make sure this is effective. So it's not just about shifting around the existing surplus under the NDCs, it's about actually making a contribution to closing the gap. That for us is a key bit of environmental integrity and a key bit of what we should be focused on. And for us, under 6.2, the upfront reporting, the transparency and accountability is not enough to deliver that. That is something political that needs to be understood to deliver effectiveness. And then on the fairness front, well, one can talk about registries and allowing people to have access to registries, that's important. But perhaps more important is that countries are enabled to make the best out of this, so part of its capacity building. But also there are questions in and around, let's say in the removal space where there's a risk of reversal. We haven't discussed that enough. Who's liable for that reversal when it happens? Is it the country that buys? Is it the country that sells? There are different views on that. And it's a question of what's fair in terms of shifting responsibility from emissions from one place to another, and whether countries are enabled through the rules to manage that liability. So there are high-level questions there if one can focus on them and communicate them clearly, and then there's a lot of other issues that really should be solved more technically. But the difficulty, of course, is distinguishing them. And then, of course, I'm not going to suggest, but I just am about to, that sometimes it doesn't suit people necessarily to sort out the important from the unimportant, because they have different views on what's important.
Because as you probably all know, if this comes down to a situation where you have to there's two things that terrify people. One of them that you send your CEO to negotiate, the other one that you send your minister to negotiate. Because you never know what they're going to do. When you let these people actually make decisions, it's kind of a scary thing. So we hope they're not going to come to ministers. But now it's time, I think, to turn to you and try and we have 10 minutes or so. I think that there's a microphone in here somewhere, even though I can't see the microphone. There's supposed to be a microphone. And if not, maybe you will speak very loudly. But if there are any questions from the room, again, if you can make it a little bit more principled as opposed to your project would be not unhelpful. There's a gentleman over here, and you go first. If you want to just tell us very quickly your name, rank, and serial number, and your question. I don't see a microphone, but yeah. Oh, there's a microphone coming. Like Ronald Reagan said, I paid for it. Go ahead, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm from Uzbekistan, Minister of Energy, Umit Mamadaminov, developing country. I think that my concern is about this developing nations are still there will be concern on the equity and then the capacity building for joining these carbon markets. How this concern should be addressed in the Baku?
Thank you. So it's about equity.
Equity and capacity building.
The capacity building. I will take 3 questions because there's only so much time. My friend from AIDA, Andrea.
Hi, my name is Andrea Bonzani from AITA. Thank you for the very interesting discussion. My question to all panelists would be, I'd like to hear their comments on what may happen to existing cooperative approaches and projects that have already been authorized if some of the rules agreed in Baku will not be fully aligned with what has been done before. I just like to hear the thoughts of the panelists on this.
Probably, Andrea, probably some of your members have fed you that question. I'm joking.
No, I anticipated the question.
And I think I will take a third question. There's the gentleman in the corner there.
Hi, I'm from a Chinese carbon credit project company, and we have some projects in Asia and Africa. I can understand the complexity for introduce such a system like a corresponding adjustment to some countries in those areas. But what I couldn't understand is the meaning for doing this. I mean, for corresponding adjustment for some countries just maybe emit like several millions of tons of carbon dioxide every year, or they are in a not a good economic situation. Because I'm from a country that emit more than 10 billions of tons of carbon dioxide every year, so it's difficult for me to understand the meaning to introducing such a system. Is it possible for give some exemption for some countries with low emissions or some low economic situations for corresponding adjustment, like what COSEA is doing? Thank you.
Okay. Well, listen, I'm not pleased because there's no gender balance in this answer in this question. So I was looking for
The panel.
for a woman in the audience, but I see none. So what I'll do is I'll start going from there, from that side, and you guys pick the questions, which one you want to answer, and also any kind of final comments that you may have. So Mbaya, you start.
Thank you. Just the last question. Corresponding adjustment and exemption for some countries for corresponding adjustment. We don't think it's about country, about exemptions. The concept of corresponding adjustment is in this mechanism, this cooperation, to avoid double counting. It's just an issue for the atmosphere. If you exempt a country to do corresponding adjustment, that emission reduction will be accounted by both, and for the atmosphere, it will be very bad. It's not a sake of country or economy or whatever. If we want to push for some countries that have some economical situation, we need to use other mechanisms or principles instead of relying on exemption on corresponding adjustment. I just wanted to add something in this involvement of head of delegations. It's very important. We have seen that in Dubai, in Bonn, but I don't think that will solve the issue. We still have some technical issue for which we need to progress before involving head of delegations. And I think the meeting we'll have in Baku, the workshop, the meeting we have like this one, organized by some institution like Andre, ITA, World Bank, and so on. Those informal meetings that involve negotiators, where we can go in depth on the technical issues and have different positions and concern, may lead to refine the different options. Because in Bonn, we have just a text with all positions. I don't think that will solve the issue. We need to refine the options, reduce the options. And for that, we need frank discussions in an informal way to try to reduce the different options. And based on that, we can make progress in Baku. And if there is one, at least, that needs technical, political decision, we may involve the head of delegation at that stage. Thank you.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
I'm going to address capacity building.
More than I thought this is what you would.
Yeah.
And equity, I think even
so
important.
to leave the difficult questions to, the actual negotiators. But the Article 6 negotiators put together for about a year a decision on capacity building. So in Sharm el-Sheikh, the mitigation division of the convention launched the capacity building for Article 6. And it's a program designed to be implemented in 2 phases, from 3 years to 5 years. This has a scope of a party-based approach. So the capacity building is done through the national designated entities, and of course the convention through their regional centers around the world. So for Africa, for the Middle East, Europe, Latin America, the Caribbean, Asia Pacific, puts together tailor-made, under national circumstances, capacity building trainings. We just came back from the ReadyCap that we organized with the carbon pricing of the Americas in Chile at LAC in July. And it was pretty intense, also with support of ICAP, for 5 days in which the RCCs from Latin America and the Caribbean, just to give an example, conduct a training on the whole framework, from carbon pricing to implementation, to training on trading modules. So, you know, the convention is working on capacity building in that sense. The work program is over there. The Secretariat has a mandate, and we have to deliver. So depending on the RCC and the host country, we can bring to the table more people, so not only DNAs, but also subnational governments, private sector, as we did in Latin America and the Asia Pacific region recently. So, yeah.
And not to mention our friends from Japan that have a very important capacity building initiative, and we're very happy to be part of that, but it is an important initiative, and it actually kind of complements a lot of the things that Natalie said. Now, we're coming down, Martin, the issue of the projects and the exemption. It'd be interesting to hear your take on those two. We're kind of getting a little bit short on time.
Yeah, sure. I mean, for me, I guess we all in this room have an interest in long-term investment in the sorts of things that will deliver zero. And that requires us to keep our eyes on the prize. And so the main thing for me in these negotiations is having a system that tends towards more ambition rather than less. And we've mentioned some of the areas in which that's important, also within 6.4. And what I would say in respect of what will happen to my projects that were authorized, I can't tell you. I hope the relevant due diligence has been done, and I hope that the standards that are being applied are broadly consistent with what we've already agreed. That's all I can say. I can't tell you. It's because I don't know what the details of what's been authorized and what's been done. But the main thing is not to try and get some sort of short-term advantage out of this at the expense of the long-term investment profile. Because if it's demonstrated, as has been done in the past, that this doesn't work or that there are problems, it will not help build confidence in the market. So what I would urge people to do is to look at those priorities, the delivery of the environmental integrity, or the ambition that's needed, the transparency and accountability that's needed for that, and to address those equity issues. On the capacity building, Japan is doing amazing work in its partnership, bringing together a whole range of capacity building. In the EU, we've focused on enabling countries to make wise choices. We have a project with UNEP Climate Change, which is helping countries do the economic modeling, the cost curves, etc., to figure out what is good value. Because I want to repeat, we're living in a world where we've got relatively low ambition at the moment and not a lot of demand. And we should be moving, if this thing is to be effective, to much higher levels of demand. And that will mean that there's a restricted supply of emission reductions and removals, because everybody will be chasing them, and higher prices. And so it's important that countries understand not just what is needed for the next couple of years, but what's needed over what I would call the 2050 to 2100 timescale. So short-term decision-making and short-term priorities are not going to help this market over the longer term.
Last word from Sonam. Again, straddling some of the equity technical issues. Any remarks from you, Sonam?
I think equity, I don't know, should we invoke the CBDR principle? Anyway, jokes aside, but I think On the equity and capacity building, I just want to echo what the colleagues before me spoke about. And I'll not name all these institutions which we all know who do provide this kind of support. But again, from a developing country experience, and this, even if you go to Harvard, they're not going to teach you this, is that we need to ensure consistency of our negotiators. I mean, if they don't perform, you have to remove them. But I think that is an unspoken rule that we need, many developing countries need to understand, that negotiations are a long drawn process, it takes years, and that you need to have consistency in your negotiators, and they need to attend online, offline. And also just want to touch upon what Mbayo was mentioning also, that that the informal meetings that are organized, and even Andre organizes some brilliant ones for Article 6, and that's why Martin and I are good friends. Martin offers beer sometimes, but so this is where it's very important, these informal meetings, because once you're in a formal setting, like say next month in Baku, when you're in, even though that workshop is informal, but it has a semblance of formality, and then everybody's guard is raised, and also that is thing, which that's why a lot of these informal meetings are important, including this one here. And then on the corresponding adjustments, I think Mbai has mentioned, I'll not touch into it, but I just want to add on this double counting. I've been witness to part of this Climate Action Data Trust. It's a Singapore IETA World Bank initiative. There's a technical committee that works on double counting, and also it was interesting the work that they're doing. It's beyond just accounting, approaches. They're also looking at into projects and all. Like for instance, if it's a forestry project, jurisdictional, within a certain 2 or 3 miles of, say, 2 forest reserves, that could result in double counting of credits. And also, these are a lot of work is being done, and it'll be good to see what's coming out of that. And then on Andrea's question, I think this, again, I'll defer to what Martin has mentioned, and just again, not to create uncertainty in the markets or anything. I remember in Bonn, a party said, look, if you start changing the AEF and all these reporting formats, then some of us who have already submitted, we are at a disadvantage. It was in reference to the BTR, and then someone from the back was joking, saying that, look, no one asked you to submit right now. So this is something, I mean, we have to be prepared for that uncertainty, and hopefully it will not really jeopardize the markets. Yeah, thank you.
Harry, do I have 2 more minutes? Thank you. Then Mbaye would like to react, but Mbaye, let's keep it to a minute.
Yeah, just to react to Aita's question on this 6.2 cooperation, ongoing ones. Those ongoing cooperation are progressing. We have reports, initial reports submitted by those parties. We have authorization, action on the ground, and we will have the review of those initial reports before the end of next month. But if there is no decision in Baku, the main issue they will face is how to submit their annual report, the AEF, Agreed Electronic Format Report, on what they have delivered. We need a decision on that to make fully operational those corporations. Thank you.
Thank you. I will make 3 points. Just Delbeke used to make 5, but I'll make 3. First thing is that this is the 3rd time, and in baseball you have 3 strikes and you're out. So I think that unless we get the result this time, I would argue that there's something wrong, and I think that this whole process is going to suffer. So I do hope that in this particular COP, we will be able to reach a result. The second thing is, we have spoken, Martin, you have mentioned tangentially, talked about 6.4 and removals. I don't know where you guys come from, but where I come from, I didn't introduce myself. I run a think tank in Brussels, the European Roundtable on Climate Change and Sustainable Transition, and I negotiate Article 6 as well. But removals are important. Removals are important, and I do remember in Paris distinctively, the reason, one of the reasons, and not an important reason, when Article 6 was put in place, is because the removals and the emissions were not in the same place. And if we go into 0 and net negative, then removals are going to have to be important as part of the international. Not everybody agrees to this, but I think it's something that we need. And the third thing is, I would have loved to ask Martin, but I'm not going to ask him because I can say anything I want and he cannot answer. But he was on the chair of the CDM executive board. He is the vice chair of the supervisory body. And looking at the CDM and looking at the Article 6.2, the French would call it a usine à gaz. I mean, we thought we negotiated something very simple in Paris on Article 6.2, and it's turning into something increasingly complex. So I would actually ask my fellow negotiators to also remember that there is a price for inefficiency. At some point, yes, you will run into a situation that's going to become under its own weight. I see Simon doesn't agree with me on that, but that is okay. Now, having said this, I will thank you all for braving the AIDA party last night and being here in the morning. I was worried there would be nobody, but they were here. Thanking the fellow panelists, the World Bank for giving us the opportunity, my fellow panelists, and especially Sonam for stepping in at the last moment. And with this, I'll call it to a close. Thank you very much.
Thank you.